more than the other two put together. So this is where the real action is. It's not in changing light bulbs. That's important. It's probably in the major way we handle electricity in the grid, in large buildings becoming more efficient, and especially in the way we generate electricity. And this plant here could be used for direct energy generation. The numbers go like this. For Miscanthus, only 20% of Illinois' cropland could produce 145 terawatt hours of energy per year. How does that compare with what is needed? The energy demand for Illinois is only 137 terawatt hours, and that includes Chicago, the third largest city in the United States. So this plant is likely to be appearing as one of the major biofuels in the future. We started by asking, can we control rising CO2 and global warming? This is a worldwide issue. It is not going to be solved by one country alone. It must be solved by countries coming together. The two countries that are producing the most carbon dioxide are the United States and China, neither of which are in the Kyoto Protocol. These two countries have to be involved. I'm not implying that either one is not doing anything. In fact, a lot is going on in both places. But I am saying that I think we need leadership and we need a change in the way people view this whole problem. Maybe we need a revolution. I think what we really want is the easy revolution, which Tom Friedman says is another name for a party. If we have a revolution in the way we handle energy, somebody's ox is going to be gored, and that's a very bad pun, and nobody wants it to be theirs. But in the end, I think you can always trust America to do the right thing after having exhausted all other possibilities. Thank you very much.
We will turn, I won't procrastinate, we'll turn straight away to Dr. Lorraine Stevenson. Lorraine is a partner with and national leader of the climate change group within Ernst & Young. She has over 25 years' experience in the energy sector, and in 2008 joined Ernst & Young, just as we were talking to her about participating in these events. Prior to taking up consulting roles, Lorraine was National Manager of Sustainability for Origin Energy Limited. Prior to working with Ernst & Young, she worked at Deloitte. Lorraine was a participant at the Australia 2020 Summit in April and is a member of the New South Wales Premier's Greenhouse Advisory Panel and a member of FVX Climate Advisory Group, which is a new carbon exchange launched by Al Gore in Sydney in September 2007. In 2006, Lorraine led the analysis undertaken by the Australian Business Roundtable on climate change on the impact of an emissions trading scheme on the national economy. She has advised the Australian government on its forecasting of the national emissions trajectory to 2030 and has been involved in energy futures studies to highlight the magnitude of the greenhouse abatement challenge and to encourage policy development for early deployment of low emission technologies. Now, Lorraine is going to speak briefly and try and really, I think we've asked her to turn her mind, taking the broad picture that Bert has painted for us, in a few words to try and look at the, if you like, the climate challenge in Australia. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for the invitation to come today. We've had such an interesting presentation. Thank you, Bert. My challenge is to bring it back to Australia, and as you've heard from the introduction, my background's very much in policy and strategy, working in the energy sector. I'm now working as a consultant with a lot of companies across Australia, and we were discussing before that they're at very different stages of readiness for the carbon-constrained world. So one of the things I wanted to do was just talk about where we have general agreement and disagreement on some of the issues going forward, perhaps to give you some idea as to why some of these issues are quite intractable at the moment, and also some comments just in terms of what government could or should be doing, what business is doing, and also, of course, what the scientific and technical community should be looking at. So one of the things is, I think, in terms of, if we start with disagreement, first of all, and everyone will have a different view, and my task today is not to give you the full answer, it's really just to stimulate some discussion. So although we've heard very compelling arguments about the science, I have to say that in my role, I hear a lot of people who immediately shake my hand and say, "Nice to meet you, I'm a climate skeptic." And I had that conversation even today. It's a sort of conversation as we're hosting a number of boardroom lunches, and it is interesting that it still comes up for significant debate. One thing I'll come back to is the issue of accessibility of the data, and I think that's quite an important issue, is that people form a view, and often it's because they're reading something that is quite simple and probably not always accurate in the media as well. So we have to look at where do people get their information from. And if you're looking at a lot of the scientific reports, they're not particularly accessible in the sense of reading them. They are available, they are on websites, but often they're very long. They're written in language that's not easy to understand. And so I think one of the recommendations going forward is that this information in a very objective sense, and even if it's both sides of the argument, should be put forward at a level where people can read it and understand it and digest it. The other issue, though, is I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, and Ross Garnaut certainly drew this out, in terms of the cost of technology options going forward. The other one, I think, is when we're looking at the equity issue in terms of our share of contribution, and that's been also something that Ross Garnaut and the Australian government are having to look at the moment in terms of the international negotiations going forward. Nobody really has, there's no agreement on how we should share the burden, if you like. So one of the things is that there's quite a lot of different models. And of course, at the moment, it was just on historic emissions for Kyoto. We went back and looked at what everyone had admitted in 1990, and the go-forward strategy was that there would be a reduction based on that sort of level. If you've read Ross Garnaut's latest paper looking at targets and trajectories, he's moving very much towards convergence and contraction, which is a per capita model. And there's going to be significant debate about whether this is appropriate or not, but we can't even come up with a methodology to share the risk and the burden going forward. The other thing, of course, is the time frame and the sense of urgency. There's still a lot of disagreement about how quickly we should act, whether this is just an insurance policy, whether we need to look at risk mitigation, but we don't really understand the urgency of the action. I think in terms of agreement, generally we're looking at broad agreement across all sectors that I speak with in terms of the need to act, particularly with no regrets. So there's no one who's particularly saying we shouldn't do anything. The issue is how far should we go? And one of the things is in a country like Australia where we are very limited with water, although we're blessed with most other resources, it's a question of acting at least in a very prudent fashion to make sure that we manage those resources very effectively and very efficiently. I think no one would disagree with that. The question is, where the disagreement is how far do you go beyond that action in spite of not knowing what the full benefits will be. So in terms of providing some solutions for that, if you look at the scientific and technical community, and many people here today, one of the big contributions, of course, will come from research, development, demonstration and commercialisation. Australia is fantastic at the R&D end. We're not so good at the demonstration, and we're pretty damn lousy at the commercialisation. And that's one of the things that we really have to improve. So it's not really so much that we don't have the capacity. We have the leading researchers in many new technologies in the world here in Australia. The question is how do we then take them out of the lab and into some reasonable sized demonstration plant and then eventually find the commercial backers for those projects.